Canada prides itself on the quality of its drinking water, but by doing so, they ignore the drinking water crisis that is happening right under their noses. Indigenous communities have been experiencing a lack of clean water in their reserves since the Indian Act has been passed. It is truly a shame that the government still hasn't made any progress in providing clean drinking water on these reserves, which is why Indigenous people should be given authority to make their decisions concerning the infrastructure and services on their land. The root of this problem can be traced back to 1876, when the Canadian Parliament passed the Indian Act. This act outlined that Indigenous people would have to live in certain areas so that European farmers could use and buy their native lands. The Indian Act also gave the government power over every aspect of Indigenous people's lives, their properties, infrastructures, status, and what resources they received. Like a puppet master controlling his puppets, the government manipulated this power to do harm to Indigenous people. Reserve land is under the jurisdiction of the federal government. They are responsible for infrastructure and services available on those reserves. This is odd because in Canada, provincial and municipal governments are responsible for providing services such as water. Non-reserve land benefits from the jurisdiction of the provincial government in their services. This is because strict provincial-wide standards can be put in place to ensure that the water quality is adequate for use. Reserve lands do not receive this benefit. The power imbalance that is present in this situation is evident. Indigenous people have little to no power when it comes to making their own decisions, which is all the more reason why Indigenous people should be given the authority instead of the federal government. To the government's credit, in recent years they have tried to fix this issue, although some Canadians do not agree to putting a budget towards fixing this problem. They think that such a small percentage of Canada experiences a lack of clean water that the problem is not even worth acknowledging. However, as Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Justice denied anywhere diminishes justice everywhere." When Canada denies clean water to even a small percentage of the population, Indigenous people, they ignore a humanitarian crisis that is happening on their grounds, under their jurisdiction. The drink water crisis facing Indigenous people isn't an unfortunate circumstance to be ignored. There are over 100 boil water advisories faced by Indigenous people on reserves today. The federal government has tried to address the long-term boil water advisories, but a few weeks after intervention, the long-term boil water advisories are replaced by short-term ones, meaning that their solutions only put band-aids on the problem. Canada has tried but has failed because they do not truly understand how or where they should begin to make major and permanent changes. This is where Indigenous people should step up and lead the way in order to solve this water crisis. Indigenous people are much more adequate when it comes to solving this problem. They experience it firsthand, so they understand it like no other. In Lytton First Nation, a retired water operator who had worked for over 35 years, along with his nephew, decided to do something about the drinking water crisis that their community faced. They worked with Roseau WaterNet, a research network at the University of British Columbia, to build a small water treatment plant, which ended the long-standing Nikia Boil Water Advisory. So who should be in charge of solving this issue? The federal government or Indigenous leaders themselves? The Indigenous people have evidently made a positive long-term change in the drink water crisis, but this change shouldn't stop at one reserve. Indigenous people should begin a new initiative where elected members from their community make the decisions concerning their infrastructure and services. This initiative will be called the League of Indigenous Reserves Canada. They can identify and solve the many issues that Indigenous reserves face and construct new ideas formed from their personal experiences, something that the federal government will never be able to do. It is a well-known fact that the different perspectives are needed when it comes to solving such issues, so having Indigenous people on the forefront of their problems will only have a positive impact. This initiative can open up job opportunities and leadership positions for Indigenous people as well. But alas, every rose has its thorn. In order for this initiative to flourish, major government funding and support is needed, which can only be won if the popular public opinion aligns with this plan. Normal Canadian citizens can help just by making their opinion on this issue known. This will force more people to talk about the issue, forcing the government to confront it as well. Ultimately, the drink water crisis that is happening on Indigenous reserves is a Canadian problem. It is a problem concerning Canadians, and it is a problem that can no longer be ignored. The esteemed Canada may boast about their achievements when it comes to providing resources for their country, but it is all for naught if they cannot support clean water for their Indigenous community. For Indigenous people, water is symbolic and spiritual. It is the interconnectedness of all life, and Indigenous people strive to protect it
So
from
we have
pollution.
more than a passing need for water. It's a spiritual, cultural relationship.
They need to be given the opportunity to do so by having the power to make decisions about their own land, or at least the land on which they live.